Picture this. The year is 1010 CE. In the Tamil kingdom of Tanjavur, thousands of workers are hauling an 80-ton granite capstone up a 6-kilometer earthen ramp using nothing but elephants, pulleys, and human ingenuity. They're building something that will last empires, survive earthquakes, and continue to inspire wonder 1,000 years later. Today, that structure, the Brihadeeswara Temple, still stands without a crack in its foundation. Its 216-foot tower casts no shadow at noon during the equinox, a feat of astronomical precision that modern architects struggle to replicate even with computer modeling. Every stone was cut and fitted so perfectly that no mortar was needed. The entire 130,000-ton structure is essentially a massive granite puzzle, locked together by physics and human genius. Now walk through any city built after 1950. You will see glass boxes that leak energy, concrete slabs that need constant repair, and buildings so aggressively ugly that cities pass laws requiring developers to include public art to compensate for their visual crimes. Structures that cost millions to build but will be demolished within decades because nobody can bear to look at them anymore. How did we go from architecture that celebrated the divine to buildings that deny the human? From craftsmanship that encoded centuries of wisdom to mass production that strip away everything that makes us feel alive? From spaces that nourish the soul to environments that actively damage our mental health? This is a story of how modernism, a movement that promised to liberate us from the past, instead imprisoned us in a world without character, beauty, or meaning. And it's a story of what we lost when we traded the cathedral for the cubicle, the carved door for the IKEA flat pack, the sacred for the efficient. The Brihadeeswara Temple wasn't just a building. It was a three-dimensional mandala, a blueprint of the cosmos carved in stone. Every measurement, every proportion, every detail was calculated according to ancient principles that modern engineers are only beginning to understand. The temple's foundation descends 20 feet into the earth, built without steel reinforcement yet capable of withstanding earthquakes that have toppled modern structures nearby. The walls taper as they rise, not just for aesthetic reasons but to distribute weight with mathematical precision. The famous shadowless tower wasn't an accident. It was designed using advanced knowledge of solar movements and architectural acoustics. But here is what's truly remarkable. This wasn't just engineering, it was storytelling. Every surface of the temple is covered with sculptures that serve as a visual library of 11th century Tamil culture. The carvings record everything from musical ragas to dance positions, from royal genealogies to grain prices. 1,000 years later, historians can read these walls like newspapers, understanding how people lived, what they valued, what they feared. Dr. R. Nagaswamy, the renowned archaeologist who decoded many of these inscriptions, discovered that the temple walls contain detailed records of the 400 dancers, 600 musicians, and countless craftsmen who worked there. Their names are preserved in stone, their contributions immortalized. Compare this to our modern buildings, where we struggle to remember the architect's name, let alone the workers who built them. The temple also functioned as an economic engine. It owned vast tracts of land, employed thousands of people, and operated as a bank, university, and cultural center. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was the beating heart of a civilization that understood architecture as social software, building not just structures but communities. Modern neuroscience is beginning to understand what ancient builders knew intuitively. Our brains are hardwired to respond to certain architectural proportions and patterns. Dr. Colin Ellard's research at the University of Waterloo found that people walking past buildings with intricate facades showed measurably different brainwave patterns than those passing blank walls. The ornate buildings activated regions associated with pleasure, curiosity, and social connection. The golden ratio, fractals, and bilateral symmetry, all common in traditional architecture, trigger what research calls perpetual fluency. Our brains process these patterns effortlessly, creating a sense of harmony and well-being. This is why people instinctively gravitate towards Gothic cathedrals, Islamic geometric patterns, or Hindu temple carvings, even when they don't understand the religious or cultural context. Traditional builders understood this intuitively. They knew that humans need visual complexity, natural materials, and meaningful symbols to feel psychologically nourished. They built for the soul as much as for the body, creating spaces that didn't just shelter but inspired. Before industrialization, building was a deeply social activity. Knowledge was passed down through generations of guilds, each guarding their secrets while collaborating on massive projects. A stone carver in medieval Europe might spend 7 years as an apprentice, learning not just techniques but the cultural meaning behind every symbol, every proportion, every choice of material. Indian craftsmanship traditions were even more sophisticated. A master carpenter didn't just know how to cut wood, he understood the spiritual properties of different trees, the astrological timing for felling timber, and the ritual ceremonies required to sanctify the construction process. Building wasn't just about creating shelter, it was about maintaining cosmic harmony. This system produced objects of extraordinary quality and meaning. A traditional Indian door wasn't just a barrier, it was a threshold between worlds, carved with protective symbols and built to last centuries. The craftsman's reputation depended on creating something worthy of being passed down through generations, so every joint, every curve, every decorative element was made with obsessive care. But this system also created something more valuable than beautiful objects. It created human meaning. The craftsman knew his work mattered. The community could read the stories embedded in their built environment. Children grew up understanding their place in a larger narrative, surrounded by objects that connected them to ancestors and traditions. The story of modernism begins with good intentions. In the early 20th century, industrial cities were crowded, polluted, and desperately in need of reform. Traditional craftsmanship seemed slow and elitist. Ornaments were expensive and time-consuming. Some reformers promised to use industrial methods to create beautiful, affordable housing for everyone. Their manifesto was seductive. Strip away unnecessary decoration, embrace the honesty of materials, and let function determine form. Buildings should be machines for living, efficient, rational, and suited to the modern age. Ornament was not just unnecessary but morally suspect, a symbol of bourgeoisie excess that had no place in the egalitarian future. The Bauhaus school in Germany became the laboratory for this new aesthetic. Students were taught to reject historical precedents and create something from first principles. They designed furniture that could be mass-produced, buildings that could be constructed quickly, and objects that looked like they belonged in the machine age. Initially, this produced some genuinely innovative work. The Barcelona Pavilion, the Villa Savoye, and early Bauhaus products had a stark beauty that felt revolutionary. They promised to liberate us from the conventions of the past and create spaces that suited to modern life. But somewhere between the laboratory and the real world, something went wrong. By the 1960s, modernist principles had been adopted by developers and governments worldwide. The results were catastrophic. Public housing projects like Pruitt Ego in St. Louis became synonyms with social dysfunction. Urban renewal projects demolished vibrant neighborhoods and replaced them with sterile complexes that nobody wanted to live in. The international style made city centers around the world virtually indistinguishable from each other. The problem wasn't just aesthetic, it was psychological and social. Modernist buildings, for all their rational planning, ignored fundamental human needs. They created environments that were difficult to navigate, impossible to personalize, and devoid of the visual richness that makes spaces feel alive. Jean Jacobs, in her devastating critique, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, showed how modernist urban planning destroyed the delicate social ecosystems that make cities work. By separating functions, eliminating messiness, and prioritizing efficiency over human-scale interaction, modernist planners created urban wastelands and people fled at the first opportunity. The psychological effects were measurable. Studies showed that people living in modernist housing developments had higher rates of depression, anxiety, and antisocial behavior. Children growing up in these environments showed developmental delays compared to those in traditional neighborhoods. The human cost of modernist design is only now becoming clear thanks to advances in environmental psychology and neuroscience. It turns out that our brains are not neutral about our surroundings. We have evolved preferences that are systematically violated by modernist design. Dr. Nikos, a mathematician and architectural theorist, has spent decades documenting how modernist buildings literally stress the human nervous system. Blank walls, harsh angles, and monotonous repetition activate the same stress responses our ancestors developed to detect predators. Our brains interpret modernist environments as potentially dangerous, keeping us in a state of low-level anxiety. Meanwhile, natural materials, organic curves, and fractal patterns have the opposite effect. They activate the parasympathetic nervous system, promoting relaxation and healing. This is why hospital patients recover faster in rooms with wood trims and views of gardens, why students perform better in schools with natural lighting and varied textures, why office workers report higher job satisfactions in buildings with courtyards and plants. The problem is that modernist design systematically eliminates these psychologically nourishing elements. Glass and steel replace wood and stone. Fluorescent lighting replaces natural illumination. Open floor plans eliminate the intimate scales that make humans feel comfortable. Blank walls replace the visual complexity that keep our brains engaged. The result is what researchers call environmental poverty, surroundings so devoid of sensory richness that they actually impair cognitive function. People working in modernist office buildings show measurably worse performance on creative tasks, have more sick days, and report lower life satisfaction than those in traditional buildings. Modernism didn't just change how buildings looked, it changed how places felt. The international style was literally designed to be international, creating a universal aesthetic that could be applied anywhere in the world. This was seen as progress. Finally, architecture could transcend the limitations of local materials, climate, and culture. But this universality came at a terrible cost. Cities began to lose their distinctive character as local building traditions were abandoned in favor of the global modernist vocabulary. A business district in Mumbai became indistinguishable from one in Minneapolis. Traditional materials like bamboo, adobe, or local stone were replaced by concrete, steel, and glass regardless of climate or context. This architectural homogenization was part of a broader cultural flattening. As Aldous Huxley predicted in Brave New World, technological standardization leads inevitably to cultural standardization. When all buildings look the same, when all furniture comes from the same factories, when all cities follow the same planning principles, people begin to lose touch with what makes their place unique. The psychological effects are profound. Humans need to feel rooted in place to develop healthy identities. Children who grew up in environments without distinctive character struggle to develop a sense of home. Adults who live in generic spaces report feeling disconnected from their communities and less invested in local issues. This is why heritage tourism has exploded in recent decades. People are desperately seeking authentic places, environments that tell stories, that show the marks of human care and craftsmanship, that feel connected to the deep patterns of human settlement. We are literally paying to visit the kind of places we used to build naturally. The triumph of modernism wasn't just aesthetic, it was economic and social. Traditional building methods required skilled craftsmen who commanded good wages and took pride in their work. Industrial methods replaced skilled labor with unskilled assembly, reducing costs but also eliminating the human knowledge and care that made traditional buildings beautiful and durable. Consider what we lost when we stopped building with stone. A traditional stonemason understood geology, weather patterns, and structural engineering through hands-on experience. They could select the right stone for each application, cut it to fit perfectly with its neighbors, and create joints that could last centuries. This knowledge was passed down through apprenticeships that created not just skilled workers but cultural carriers who maintained building traditions across generations. Modern construction workers, by contrast, are largely assemblers of prefabricated components. A typical construction crew might not include a single person who understands how to work stone, timber, or clay in traditional ways. They can follow blueprints and operate machines, but they have lost touch with the material intelligence that created the world's most beloved buildings. This affects more than just construction. We have lost similar skills across all areas of making. Traditional furniture makers understood wood grain, joinery techniques, and finishing methods that produced pieces lasting centuries. Traditional textile workers could spin, dye, weave, and embroider using techniques that created textiles of extraordinary beauty and durability. These weren't just practical skills, they were forms of cultural knowledge. A traditional Indian block printer didn't just know how to apply dye to cloth, they understood the symbolic meaning of different patterns, the seasonal appropriateness of different colors, and the social significance of different textile types. When we mechanized textile production, we didn't just change how cloth was made, we severed the connection between material culture and cultural meaning. Recent advances in neuroscience and environmental psychology are providing scientific validation for what traditional builders knew intuitively. Beauty isn't just decoration, it's a biological necessity. Our brains are hardwired to respond positively to certain patterns, proportions, and materials that were common in traditional architecture but were systematically excluded from modernist designs. Dr. Susan at Johns Hopkins has pioneered the field of neuroaesthetics using brain imaging to understand how different environments affect human cognition and well-being. Her research shows that exposure to natural materials like wood and stone activates different neural pathways than synthetic materials like plastic and vinyl. Natural materials engage more areas of the brain simultaneously, creating richer sensory experiences that promote both relaxation and alertness. Similarly, research on fractal patterns, the self-similar shapes found throughout nature and traditional art, shows that humans find them inherently calming and beautiful. Jackson Pollock's painting, Gothic rose windows, and Indian temple carvings all contain fractal patterns that reduce stress hormones and promote healing. Modernist design, with its emphasis on simple geometric forms, systematically eliminates these psychologically beneficial patterns. The implications for architecture and design are profound. Buildings designed according to traditional proportions and using natural materials don't just look better, they measurably improve human health and performance. This isn't nostalgia, it's neuroscience. Our brains evolved in natural environment characterized by complexity, variety, and organic forms. Modernist environments that eliminate these features are literally alien to our nervous system, creating chronic stress that manifests as depression, anxiety, and physical illness. Paradoxically, the digital age is enabling a renaissance in traditional crafts. Computer-controlled tools like CNC machines and 3D printers can now execute complex traditional patterns with unprecedented precision and affordability. A contemporary woodworker can combine ancient joinery techniques with digital modeling to create furniture that honors traditional aesthetics while meeting modern performance standards. In India, this synthesis is particularly exciting. Traditional textile techniques like ikat, block printing, and hand weaving are being combined with contemporary design sensibilities to create products that are both culturally rooted and globally appealing. Indian fashion designers like Sabyasachi Mukherjee and Anita Dongre have shown that traditional crafts can command premium prices in international markets when they're positioned properly. The key insight is that craft and technology aren't opposites, they're complementary. CNC machines can cut traditional joinery with perfect precision. Digital design tools can help traditional patterns scale to contemporary applications. Online platforms can connect craftspeople with global markets. But the most important change is philosophical, not technological. Young designers and makers are rejecting the modernist assumption that newer is always better. They're seeking out traditional masters, learning techniques that were nearly lost, and adapting them to contemporary needs. This is happening across all categories of designs. Furniture makers are rediscovering traditional joinery, architects are studying vernacular building techniques, fashion designers are collaborating with traditional weavers and embroiderers, chefs are reviving heirloom varieties and traditional cooking methods. The common thread is the recognition that traditional methods often produce superior results, not because they're old, but because they have been refined over generations of use. Traditional building techniques often prove more durable, more energy efficient, and more beautiful than their industrial replacements. Traditional farming methods often produce more nutritious food with less environmental impact. Traditional crafts often create objects with character and meaning that mass-produced items can never match. One of the most promising developments in contemporary architecture is the biophilic design movement, which explicitly tries to reconnect buildings with natural patterns and processes. Instead of fighting against nature, biophilic design works with it, creating buildings that feel alive rather than mechanical. This isn't just about adding plants to sterile interiors. Though that helps, biophilic design thinks systematically about how buildings can support the patterns of life that humans evolved with. It includes natural lighting that varies throughout the day, natural ventilation that responds to weather patterns, water features that provide both humidity and acoustic masking, and materials and texture that connect occupant to the natural world. The results are dramatic. Amazon Sphere in Seattle, which housed tropical plants alongside office workers, report significantly higher employee satisfaction and retention. A Singapore hotel, which incorporates living walls and sky gardens throughout the structure, uses 30% less energy than comparable buildings while providing superior guest experiences. Traditional Indian architecture was inherently biophilic. Courtyards provided natural cooling and lighting, water features created pleasant microclimates, local materials connected buildings to their ecological context, gardens and trees were integrated into the building fabric rather than treated as separate landscaping elements. Contemporary Indian architects have shown how these principles can be adapted to modern needs. Their buildings use advanced environmental systems and contemporary materials while maintaining the sensory richness and ecological integration of traditional architecture. They prove that sustainability and beauty aren't contradictory, they're complementary. Perhaps the most powerful argument for abandoning modernist orthodoxy is economic. Beautiful buildings, despite costing more initially, prove to be better investments over time. They command higher rents, attract better tenants, require less marketing, and maintain their value longer than ugly buildings. This is measurable. Real estate studies consistently show that buildings with distinctive character and high quality materials outperform generic buildings in both rental income and resale value. The premium for character properties has increased steadily over the past 2 decades as people become willing to pay more for environments that nourish rather than drain them. The same pattern holds for consumer products. Handcrafted furniture commands multiples of the price of mass produced equivalents. Artisanal food products consistently outperform industrial alternatives. Traditional textiles sell for premium prices even when their performance characteristics are similar to synthetic alternatives. This suggests that the market is correcting the modernist mistake. Consumers are willing to pay for quality, beauty, and meaning when they are available. The problem is that modernist production methods have made such products scarce, creating artificial scarcity that drives up prices. But new technologies and changing consumer preferences are beginning to change this calculus. Digital fabrication tools can produce complex traditional patterns at scale. Online platforms can connect consumers directly with craftspeople, eliminating middlemen. Social media allows small producers to build brands based on quality and story rather than just price and convenience. The result is a growing market for products that combine traditional aesthetics with contemporary performance. Consumers increasingly understand that buying cheap, disposable products is actually more expensive in the long term than buying well made items that last longer. Standing again beneath the miraculous tower in Tanjavur, we can articulate what the Chola builders understood that what we have forgotten. Architecture is not just about shelter, it's about creating meaning. Buildings aren't just functional objects, they're cultural statements that shape how people understand themselves and their place in the world. The Brihadeeswara Temple embodies what we might call the Brihadeeswara principle, the idea that human-made environment should be worthy of the human spirit. They should inspire rather than depress, connect us to something larger than ourselves rather than isolate us in private consumption, and endure long enough to serve generations rather than decades. This doesn't mean we should try to rebuild the 11th century. The Chola builders used the best available technology to create something beautiful and meaningful, and we should do the same, using contemporary tools to recover the psychological and cultural depth that modernism stripped away. This means designing buildings that nourish human biology, using natural materials, fractal patterns, and biophilic principles that support rather than stress our nervous systems. It means creating environments that tell stories and embed cultural meaning rather than expressing nothing but efficiency and cost cutting. We also need to recover the human dimension of making. This doesn't mean abandoning technology, but it does mean recognizing that human hands and minds are the ultimate source of quality and meaning in manufactured objects. Machines can execute human designs with perfect precision, but they can't originate the cultural intelligence that makes designs worth executing. This requires rebuilding the social infrastructure of craft, the apprenticeship systems, guild organizations, and cultural institutions that maintained quality standards and passed knowledge across generations. It means creating economic incentives for craftspeople to develop their skills. It means educating consumers to recognize and value the difference between machine-made adequacy and human-made excellence. Most importantly, it means changing our relationship to objects from consumption to stewardship. Instead of buying cheap items and discarding them when they break or go out of style, we need to return to buying well-made items and maintaining them across decades. This is actually more economical in the long term, but it requires planning and patience that consumer culture actively discourages. Finally, we need to recover the connection between places and their distinctive character. This means using local materials, respecting local climate and topography, and drawing inspiration from local cultural traditions rather than imposing universal solutions regardless of context. This isn't about museum piece preservation or nostalgic recreation. Traditional building methods often prove superior to industrial alternatives when adapted thoughtfully to contemporary needs. The key is understanding that local doesn't mean backward and universal doesn't mean progress. The most sustainable buildings are often those that work with rather than against their environmental and cultural context. The most beautiful cities are those that evolved organically rather than being imposed according to abstract planning principles. We return to that miraculous moment at the Brihadeeswara Temple when the 216-foot tower casts no shadow. This isn't just an architectural curiosity, it's a metaphor for human potential. When we align our making with the deepest patterns of nature and culture, we can create things that seem to defy the normal limitations of matter and time. The shadowless tower reminds us that architecture is a form of applied philosophy. Every building embodies assumptions about what humans need, what beauty means, and how we should relate to the natural world. Modernist buildings embody assumptions that prove to be false. The efficiency matters more than meaning, that newer is always better than older, that humans are adaptable enough to thrive in any environment no matter how impoverished. The Chola builders embodied different assumptions, that humans deserve beautiful environment, that buildings should serve the soul as well as the body, and that the highest technology is that which harmonizes human needs with natural patterns. These assumptions produced architecture that continues to inspire wonder 1,000 years later. We have the opportunity to make the same choice today. We can continue building the bland, efficient, soul-crushing environments that modernism gave us, or we can recover the principles that created the world's most beloved places. We can settle for adequate or demand excellent. We can design for the next quarter's profit or the next generation's inheritance. The choice seems obvious when stated this way, but it requires rejecting almost everything the design establishment has taught us for the past century. It requires valuing beauty over efficiency, meaning over cost-cutting, and human flourishing over abstract principles. Most of all, it requires recognizing that the modernist promise was a lie. Minimalism didn't liberate us, it impoverished us. Mass production didn't democratize beauty, it eliminated it. The machine aesthetic didn't express the spirit of the age, it crushed it. But unlike the Chola builders, we know what we are up against. We have neuroscience to validate our intuitions about beauty. We have environmental psychology to measure the costs of ugly environments. We have global communications to share traditional knowledge across culture. We have digital fabrication tools to execute complex traditional patterns at contemporary scales. We have, in other words, everything we need to build a more beautiful world. The only question is whether we have the courage to reject the modernist mistake and the wisdom to learn from the masters who came before us. The tower at Tanjavur casts no shadow because its builder understood something about the relationship between human making and cosmic order that we have forgotten, but we can remember. We can look at that miraculous structure and say, if they could do this with hand tools and human labor, what might we accomplish with their wisdom and our tools? The shadowless tower is waiting for us to answer that question. It's time to step out of the long shadow that modernism cast over human making and build again in the full light of human possibility.